I think it was the philosopher Madonna that said, we are living in a material world. She was wrong. We actually live in a spiritual world. We live in the kind of world where the haunted house on the block gives us the heebie-jeebies, and, where we like people because we get a good feeling. There is no material explanation for that. The only explanation is that there is more to life that we can see, maybe entire dimensions of reality that we're oblivious to. Do we live in a world with angels and demons? And if we don't, why do we find the idea so fascinating? Does it say something about us? Today, I have an expert with me you are going to love. He's a guy who has studied the hidden and almost magical world of symbolism. He can explain why, whether it's in our fairy tales or our conspiracy theories. I'm going to talk about all of them. And what does it say about us? But we always tell the same stories. Welcome, renowned Christian artist, public intellectual, and the host of The Symbolic World, Jonathan Pageau. First, before we get to Jonathan, if pain is affecting your life the way it used to affect mine, maybe your resolution for the year 2025 should be make 2025 the year of feeling good again. I suffered from terrible pain in my hands for years. It got so bad I thought I was going to have to quit my job, but I discovered something. Actually, I can't take credit for this. My wife discovered something and then told me to take it, and I'm afraid of my wife at times. So I took it, and I got my life back. It completely shocked me. I didn't expect it to work, but it did. Relief Factor. It's a daily supplement that helps your body fight pain by fighting inflammation, which is the source of most of the pain in our bodies and a lot of our disease. It's 100% drug-free, developed by doctors to help reduce or eliminate pain. And over 1 million people have tried Relief Factor's Quick Start Kit. 70% of them have gone on to order it again and again. Make 2025 the year of feeling good and living great. Trying Relief Factor is easy. Get their 3-week quick start for only $19.95. That's less than $1 a day. Call 800-4RELIEF. 800, the number 4RELIEF, or relieffactor.com. Hi. I said a few weeks ago that there's something going on with all of us. Mm-hmm. The Pizzagate people, mm-hmm. they were wrong, mm-hmm. but they weren't wrong in some ways. Yeah. You know what I mean? There's this collective feeling that elites are raping our children. Mm-hmm. And we don't have any evidence. I don't know where this has come from, but we now know it looks like that's true mm-hmm. all over the world. What is that? What is that?
Well, a good way to understand it is, that famous conspiracy theory about the lizard people is mm-hmm. a good way to understand it. And what happens is people have an insight about our leadership. And the insight is something like, our leaders are supposed to be there for us, but mm-hmm. they're not. They're there for something else. Mm-hmm. And what it is that they want or what it is they're doing isn't clear. They want something else. They want power. They see us as just something to feed upon, Mm-hmm. And so that gets structured in images. And the image of the lizard person is a great image. Like they look like humans, but they're actually some other thing.
I've said 1 million times, and I know they're not lizard people, but would you be surprised if they pulled off a mask? It would make more sense. Yeah. You know what I mean?
And so that's the way to think about it, is you can see these types of crazy conspiracy theories. Pizzagate's another example where some of the details of the thing people mm-hmm. are seeing are wrong, and they're kind of crazy and over the top, and they get into crazy conspiracy-minded ideas. But if you think of the people as like a tuning fork, and they get a sense, they start to vibrate. And they start to sound an alarm, like there's something wrong. There's something wrong about the way that our leaders are acting with us. We have to listen. Mm-hmm. We don't have to take all the details seriously.
Correct.
But usually they have, the sense that they have is probably right. And so we can look through the mythological images and realize that, even if, I don't believe in actual lizard people, but the image, but the image of the serpent, in the garden.
We shouldn't be thinking about the serpent or the lizard. We should be thinking about, what is that saying?
Yeah, what is it saying about the moment in culture and the way in which we interact with our leaders? And that's true about a lot of conspiracy theorists. You can usually, if you take one step back and you look at it, you can kind of understand it. I remember the conspiracy theory in COVID when they said 5G causes COVID, right? Mm-hmm. And you're like, well, I don't know, whatever. So you realize, no, actually 5G doesn't cause COVID mechanically, but does 5G cause COVID? Like, if we didn't have the connection that we had on the internet, and we didn't have all this way of surveilling and of staying in touch, tracking everyone, would there have been the COVID reaction that there was? And the answer is obviously no. 100 years ago, people would have died and we would have gone on with our life. And so does 5G cause COVID? Well, in a way, yes. It's not a mechanical cause, but it is something that is like a meaning cause, right? It's related. And the people, like just the regular Joes, they sense that, but they formulate it in all kinds of weird ways that are sticky. And so I think that there are ways to look at cultural narratives that can help us understand what's happening, if that's what we want. If we want to understand what's happening in the world,
I'd like to.
It's like we can look at these cultural narratives from one step removed, and we can actually understand what's happening.
So what are the cultural narratives that you're seeing that you're like, oh?
Well, one of them is the lizard people one is a good one to understand, and it has to do with the fetishization of, or the obsession with that which is strange. It's a good way of thinking about it, right? So you have your world, right? You have your story, you have your identity. No matter which one it is, it doesn't matter. You have your family, and then there are elements that are strange, that don't belong. Mm-hmm. And what's been happening now for the past, since World War II really, is we're obsessed with that question. So on the one hand, we fetishize that which is strange. So you have narratives like basically the idea that anything that's not my identity is better. Right? So we fetishize other cultures, we fetishize other things, or it's the opposite, or we kind of fall into this idea that we're in danger. We're being invaded from without in all kinds of ways. There are people with bad intentions that are trying to influence our children, or that are trying to come in and take our jobs, or whatever it is.
But both of those, a step back, are absolutely true.
Right.
Right, okay.
Yeah, and so both of those are showing a moment in culture that is worth noticing, which is that when any culture becomes obsessed with that which is outside, it signals something about who we are. It signals something about how we're running out of ourselves. We're running out of fuel. We're on the edge of death, you could say. So the end of a world has a shape. It looks a certain way. When the Roman Empire was close to its own demise. Fall, the young people were obsessed with the barbarians. They actually people would complain that they dressed like the barbarians. They would wear pants and they would wear their hair like their enemy. And so it's like, what does that mean? And it signals that we're nearing some kind of crisis, is a good way to think about it.
So I got so many questions on just that. So let me start here. When it chicken and the egg.
Yeah.
What's happening first, and how do we all connect that? I mean, I find it strange. People are finding God. Mm-hmm. They're questioning demons now. I talk to atheists who say there's no other way to describe what's happening other than evil. Yeah. And around the world, we're all protesting the same things our governments are doing. This is global in its nature. And that makes it feel otherworldly. Yeah. It makes it feel like that evil is an actual force. And I don't think the average American, and especially European, have been there in a long time.
Yeah. Well, there's definitely something happening. And like you said, there's a phenomenon that's happening in every field simultaneously, which is materialism is running out. The mechanical, explanations of things, the way that we describe things as basically billiard balls bumping into each other, is not sufficient. And people are reaching that conclusion in science, in psychology, in all the different fields simultaneously. It's the problem of complexity. It's the problem of emergence. They have different ways of talking about it. It's like, how do we account for how multiplicity becomes one. Like, how can something be many things, like have parts, but then also be, you can see it as one thing? And how does that work in terms of people, right? So it's like, how is America one thing? And America is billions of, it's like millions and millions and millions of things.
But if I may, our whole country was built on e pluribus unum, and our unum were the principles that built us. That we don't share those anymore.
That's right. And that's what I think people are noticing, is that the way that people join together into one is not arbitrary. There has to be something. It has to be a principle or a principality. You can say it in different ways, that is overseeing or that is binding multiplicity together.
Explain principality. Interesting word.
Well, so principality is something like a principle, but a principle that's active. Right? It's acting on us. And so a boss is a principality for all intents and purposes. So you have a boss, you have a team, and the boss is trying to embody the purpose of the team, but he's doing it actively. It's not just a passive principle that we all kind of follow. It's like, if you don't follow this, there'll be punishment.
So
and
that
if you
could
do,
be
there'll be reward and all that stuff.
Beyond a boss, God, and Satan.
Satan, but also all kinds of principalities, right? So that's why when you said the idea of demons, in some ways we're at a point where the question or the possibility of angels and demons all of a sudden becomes prescient again, where I'm talking to cognitive psychologists and they use fancy words. They talk about transpersonal agency, right? What are we talking about? What's a transpersonal agency? It means that they're recognizing patterns of agency that are beyond the human person. And they realize that when people act together in groups, that there's something binding them together, and there's something making them work towards a single goal, and that something like an angel, they won't use the word angel, but that's really what it is that they're slowly kind of pointing to, and that there are some of these transpersonal agencies that spiral into chaos, right? They kind of spiral you down into breakdown. They capture you. Think about like a street gang. Like a street gang has a type of transpersonal agency, but it's devouring the people inside. Correct. Like it's basically just destroying them. Correct. So it's like, well, what's that? Well, that's a demon. That's what we used to call a demon. And now people don't want to use that word, but it's in some ways we're moving it towards a position where it's becoming better to actually use these terms to understand. And it's really to understand, because what you want to do is to be able to see what's happening and to recognize what's going on. When you have a kind of intellectual fashion or some kind of idea that like starts to capture people and push them in a direction, that's a type of agency. It wants something, right?
Okay, so wait, let's just explain a couple of things. Do you believe in evil as an entity?
I would say I believe in the devil. Yes, I do believe in the devil. I believe that the evil doesn't have its own existence. It's a parasite, right? That's the best way of understanding it. It's like it takes something good and it twists it.
Correct.
Right.
And but it has its own.
It has a coherence to it. It has a type of coherence.
And so when you're looking at things happening all around the world, I think we're seeing possession all the time. You watch people on TV, and sometimes they absolutely look possessed. They act like possessed people. And it's all part of this insanity that's going on. What I want to know is, are you saying that this is a physical thing, that you start getting wrapped up into this and then you just go down? Or are you saying, no, this is an outside force that is coming in and invading, and we're just ripe for the picking?
Yeah. I think the best way to understand it is especially for a demon, the best way to understand it is as an outside force. Because the reason why we think of it that way is because, let's say, the transpersonal agency, let's say, that's making you drink, let's say, like, it doesn't want good for you. It's bringing you on a path that's actually destroying you. And so if you think about that like at a higher level in terms of a group, if you have a group that's engaging in absolutely self-destructive behavior, that cannot be an inner truth. It's an outer truth. It's something that has intentions that are from something else. So you can imagine, like, we have to be careful. We have to try to keep it as as let's say, grounded as possible, right? So you have a foreign government, right? That foreign government has interest in your government, let's say, falling apart. So they would be willing to influence your people, let's say, funding drug gangs or funding all kinds of things that will bring the breakdown of your people. And so you're like, well, that's a foreign influence, right? And that's how to think about it. You can think about it in terms of, let's say, another government, but sometimes there's also something happening even at higher levels where you have beings that have other intentions that are affecting us and bringing us towards our own destruction. Usually it has to do with, let's say, just gaining power for that being, right? It's like anger, let's say, in a person, it's like if you give in to the sin of anger, it's like anger wants to be primordial, right? It wants to rule you. It wants to take over all your energies, the gambling, or you can think of all the things that take over people, but that happens in societies too. So, I mean, we've seen like this rainbow stuff, like that's part of like it's completely coherent and it wants something and it's infecting or it's taking over people's minds.
It just is destructive.
Yeah. And it's destructive to them, destructive to our society.
Everything. And because it's you cannot feed it. It just keeps consuming.
Yeah.
You give and it wants more.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it wants everything.
Right.
It wants to take over.
And is willing to destroy
Yeah.
whatever stands in its way.
Exactly. And so that's a good way to understand it. And the best way to understand it, like, so that you don't fall into just woo stuff or like kind of magical thinking, is to think about a foreign influence, like to think about a government that is affecting us. And so let's say for the rainbow stuff, you can realize that there's an actual principality, like a kind of some transpersonal agency, a demon that wants something and is devouring us. And you'll also have foreign agents that are willing to feed that because it's to their advantage that you're destroyed. And so all of this makes sense. Like it means that you can trace sometimes the causalities. You can say, oh, I can see that there are people with bad intentions that are influencing us towards something, but they're doing it using a bigger story, which is, basically a coherent path towards destruction. Like any society that starts to emphasize behaviors that lead you away from just having children is a society on its deathbed. It's a society that's moving towards its own destruction.
Objective.
Yeah, just very, very objective, like very Darwinian almost. Like just like if you don't have children, you stop existing. It's very simple.
Right. So you just brought up Darwin. Where did we begin to go wrong this time? Is it Darwin? Is it the bomb? Is it science? What is it? Because I've never in my lifetime seen people interact and talk about the things en masse like we're talking. I was just sitting here thinking, 20 years ago, I could have had you on the podcast and I would have been thinking the whole time, I don't know who's getting this. I don't know who's getting this. I'm interested, but I don't know.
Guy.
But now, this is the kind of stuff the average person
they can see
at least can recognize and go, yeah, I think I've seen kind of that.
For sure, our world is based on our world now, and all of the positive and negative elements of our world is based on World War II. It is related to, in some extent, to the bomb and also to the things that we did during World War II. Because one of the problems you can have, like think about it this way, is that let's say nations have identities, they have a transpersonal type of agency, and during World War II, the fascists got that wrong. They treated that as an idol. They basically said, like, we have this national identity or this ethnic identity, and this is ours and it belongs to us, and we're going to like raise it up superior to everybody else. Everything we've been seeing since then, in some ways, has been kind of a reaction to that. So we actually now are very suspicious of identity, and we tend to emphasize things that are diminutive of identity. And so we want equality. All these things are not bad in themselves.
Yes.
They're just dangerous if you don't see if you push them too far, where it goes. And so we want equality, we want difference, we want multiplicity, we want variety. And then if you push that too far, then at some point it becomes decomposition. Right? Because variety without unity is just basically death. It's decomposition. So that's where we are. you can see it. Like after World War II, the next generation become the hippies, and then you can just cycle it in a few cycles, and then you end up with basically like kind of crazy woke culture right now. It's directly related. That's why there's a feeling of Marxism in the wokeism. There's a feeling of like kind of postmodern multiplicity. There's revolutionary ideas in all of the woke stuff, and it's all because I think it's like a wave that started at the end of World War II.
More with Jonathan in just a minute. First, let me tell you about the Jase case. We all need to realize we are powerful, and we need to be empowered by ourselves to care for ourselves, and empowered to the idea of responsibility for our loved ones when the unexpected happens. I don't know if you've been paying attention lately, but a lot of unexpected things have been happening. A lot. In many cases, emergency situations could mean that pharmacies don't have the ability to stock important medications on hand, medications that you and your family might need. The good news is there's something you can do to ensure that your family, your loved ones, have medical care when it's needed, and it's a solution thousands of people have already discovered. It's called the Jase case, and it will allow you to start stocking up on medications now so you're prepared. The Jase case is a personalized emergency kit that contains essential antibiotics and medications that treat the most common and deadly bacterial infections. It is providing 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use. You just fill out a simple form online, and you'll have it in case you need it. Then they also have ivermectin as an add-on. If you want it, you can get it. Jase.com, Jase.com. Enter the promo code Beck at checkout for a discount on your order. Promo code Beck, Jase.com. You know, you seem to know history quite well. Is this a cycle?
I think that's a good way of thinking about it. You know, that it's hard to know how big the cycle is. I keep saying
it's the biggest in my lifetime.
Yeah.
You know, this isn't the Jesus movement of the 70s.
Yeah.
There's deep rot here.
Yeah. I think that's the best way to think about it, is that there are natural cycles, natural in the sense that, you know, that societies and individuals, they emphasize certain things, and that leads to certain counterbalance. And so you have these kind of cycles that the thing that's hard to know is how big is this moment? That's the question, because we're clearly at the end of something. We kind of feel we're at the end of something. We can even see the new beginning kind of peeking through in these insights. The fact that, for example, people are now, normal people who would have thought talking about transpersonal agencies or angels or demons would have thought you were just a kooky, crazy person, are now saying, well, actually, no, I kind of see that this is part of the world. This is a new beginning. This is something that's kind of peeking through. And
that's the green shoot, if you will.
Possibly. It might also be negative in some ways too, because people are like, oh, you know, there are transpersonal agents, they're demons. Where can we talk to these people? Can we talk to these beings and, you know, have them influence us? You know, you have all these stories of tech people, you know, who take psychedelics in order to kind of receive information from the other side, you know, even to build their technologies.
It's very similar. I don't know if you've ever read the book. I think you'd love it. Hitler's Monsters. And it was a guy who wanted to write the quintessential book on he started out, was this a Christian movement or not? And he went back and he found the deep roots. Once you get rid of God, then you start going back to witchcraft and everything else. And he showed that Nietzsche is right, and you're going to find a God, but their God was a mixture of science, technology, science, and then the occult. And that's really kind of where we are now.
I think you're right. And there's a kind of a hidden strain of history that most people don't know, which is the development of kind of esoteric and occult thinking. And that's definitely now. I mean, now it's weird because it's in the popular sphere. You know, you have people, like regular people who are interested in these things, say they're witches or or casting spells.
It's bizarre.
So it's like as if this thing that used to be kind of elite and in the secret societies and all this stuff has now become almost like, we have a witchcraft school at 2 streets from my house. It's like, it's a witchcraft school. I don't know what they're
That's
teaching.
in Canada?
Yeah.
What are they teaching?
Yeah, it's like, I don't know. I mean, I didn't go in to figure out. I'm sure they're teaching people how to cast spells and to do all that stuff. So it's very weird. Yeah, so in every town in Canada, for example, now in Quebec, where I'm from, there used to be the most Catholic place in the world. And now every little town has like a New Age, shop, but the churches are closing down.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
when you say that people are casting spells and New Age stuff, people think they're just shedding religion, which is a man's, man sees and hears God, and then his way to interpret and be able to get a group together and pass that information on through religion. They think they're just shedding that, but you can't leave the vacuum.
No, that's impossible. And that's why you can see it. One of the things, it's funny, because one of the things that the internet has done is made people aware of these agencies that are running through us, because they used to, let's say, these types of agencies used to act on us over long periods of time. So maybe generations, you don't see it. But now we're seeing it happen very quickly because of the internet. So we're seeing these things take over, like virality in general. Like all of a sudden you see something, everybody cares about something for like 10 minutes and then it's gone. It's like, what is this? How is it mobilizing people? And we're seeing it definitely happen in social spheres. And it seems like one of the things that there was hope, or some of the elites wanted to do, was realizing that we have this religious problem and trying to substitute it with a kind of green, like a kind of environmental religion, or also the rainbow type religion.
Transgenderism.
Yeah, all that stuff presented, like the trans is sacred aspect of the LGBT movement, realizing we need some kind of religious theory, and so we're going to do this with these other structures. But religion isn't arbitrary. You can't just decide what it is. You get people to care about.
And it was a religious movement in the in the BC days. There were times where societies would have these gods, and the men would become women, and it would celebrate, abortion and all the things that we're doing. We're just casting it in a different light, but it's the same thing. When you tell me that, no, there's something that's in you, but it's not physical, and it's telling you that you're not really a boy or a girl, you're recasting the soul. Yeah. And attaching something to it that the soul wouldn't tell you.
Yeah. Yeah, you're feeding on a narrative and a story and an agency that is beyond your individual. So you can think about it this way. It's pretty simple, like in terms of phenomena, you can get it. It's like a teenager is in a moment of transition, right? A teenager is now no longer a child, is moving away from the parents, and in that moment of transition is the time where you want to cast that being. Right. That's why we would have initiation rituals. Right. We'd have all these kind of things to kind of say, we're going to take this problem of someone in transition and confused and asking questions, and we're going to give it a direction. And so all of the bar mitzvah is a good example. And so it makes sense that
there's another force.
There all kinds of things are trying. That's why teenagers are always the prey of like rock and roll culture or all these things. And the LGBT stuff is just the most recent one, which is like a teenager is confused and then they say, well, we have an answer for that confusion. We can explain to you why you don't know who you are. We can explain to you why you have these feelings that make you feel like you're alienated from your body. And it's totally normal when you reach puberty to be alienated from your body, because you're going through such rapid changes that you are in some ways becoming a kind of potential on which a community
it's your
will
cocoon moment.
Exactly, that's so that's the moment to get people. It's like in that moment of puberty, you can completely capture people towards something, and so we have to. If we know that, like if we can see it, we have to be able to formulate positive answers, because this is one of the issues that we have. Is that one of the problems that's happened, I think, in North America, is that we focus so much on like the individual and everything that we just want the teenager, for example, to just to figure themselves out. But that's not what's happening when you're a teenager. You're actually looking for allegiance. That's why teenagers follow all these weird fashions and all this. So they're looking to connect. So we had to find ways to give these teenagers a way to see something beyond themselves and to participate in it. And if we don't, someone else will.
So it's interesting because the ones who are now waking up, Generation Z, they're not buying any of this bullcrap.
Yeah.
And they're the ones that I think are going to save the world in the end. They're the hero generation. But we have acquiesced as parents and society. We've acquiesced to the scientists, to the doctors, to the experts, and we just stand there quietly, even though we know the experts have no idea what they're talking about.
Yeah.
No idea.
Yeah.
And we're seeing now the results of it. And is that because the churches just became irrelevant?
I think it might be in some part because the churches failed to understand the grandeur of what they were holding. And so one of the things that we saw in the late 19th and 20th century is that in some ways the churches became very materialistic. Mm-hmm. And on the one hand, they were like, well, we believe in God, we believe in all this stuff, but we also think that really it's science. It's science.
Right.
But
wait.
I'm not against science, by the way. Right. I'm not saying that science isn't real, but science explains mechanical causes. It doesn't capture meaning.
I think, exactly. I think if there is a God, he's the greatest scientist, because this is all math.
Of course.
Okay, but math's not behind all this. Yeah. Math is how it exists and how it works, but that's not the mind behind the math.
And that's a good way. It's exactly the way of thinking about it, is that humans are a joining of mind and matter. They're a joining of intention, of will, of agency.
And capital M mind.
Yeah. And so I think that one of the things that happened is in some ways the church or the Christians, they lost sight of what they were holding, like the story, the world view, you could say, that they were holding. And they reduced it to morality and science, basically. But what we have is way more than that. Like the vision that's presented in the Bible and the vision that's presented in the Christian cosmology or the religious cosmology is something like an orienting structure, right? It helps people understand how to be with others and how to orient yourself as you move. And if we forget that, then we have this problem, which is that someone else is going to take it from you. Mm-hmm. And someone else is going to take that from you, because that's actually how we exist. And so one of the things we've been trying to do, in the past few years is say, how can we help people connect again with these things? That's why, what I do on the symbolic world is basically help people see how the stories, not just the Bible, but, even like our fairy tales, the different kind of cultural stories that we have, that they are these orienting mechanisms. There are ways for you to identify with a purpose and a group, or, a value, and then orient yourself with others towards that.
So I've often thought, Grimm's fairy tales, they're really grim. The real ones are grim, I know you just redid Snow White and took all the Disney stuff out of it and made it the real tale. These were simply ways to tell a story to prepare you for life.
That's what it is.
Right?
That's right, yeah.
In a way you could understand as a child.
Yeah, and you didn't even have to understand it. It's like, it really is like how when you train a child in doing something, they don't understand the fullness of what it is that they're doing yet.
Right.
Because they don't have maturity anyways. It's giving them a kind of pattern of being in which to embark. And that's why people often don't understand the fairy tales. They think that the fairy tales are morality tales, but they're not. They're much deeper than that. They really are orienting mechanisms. And so that's one of the things we were trying to do with these fairy tales, is say, can we represent them to the world in a way that will play that role again?
So tell me the story of Snow White. What's important in the actual story of Snow White?
Well, the story of Snow White is really, a lot of the fairy tales, especially these types of fairy tales, they are about transition, right? So they're really about a child becoming an adult. And so in the story of Snow White, it's a girl. And so it's like there is a kind of coming of age aspect to it. There is there is, and this is funny because a lot of the Christians, they don't like the fact that the secular people have told them there's a sexual element to the story. And the truth is there is, but it's not just a sexual story, but there is an aspect of it which has to do with sexual maturation, which has to do with finding your place in the world, and just in general, kind of going through chaos and finding your own identity, right? That basic story trope of you're somewhere, you kind of fall into a kind of confusion and chaos, and then you find your way out and you're in a better place. And that's what happens during a teenage years, by the way. And so the story of Snow White is about that for a girl. It's like a young girl who is innocent and beautiful. As she starts to change, she now at first faces all the negative consequences of that. Jealousy from the other women, all these men that are kind of like a caricature of men, that are these little men,
dwarfs.
yeah, that are like just dopey and sneezy or whatever, that they can't be my mate. So they're kind of disgusting, right? These men that, and I have to work and I have to clean the house and I have to serve these men that aren't, and I don't know what it is. And I've just gone through this kind of chaos where, I'm thrown into this world where everything is changing. And then the story of Snow White is about that imaged as a kind of death. It is related in some extent to a young girl kind of reaching the age where she starts her menstrual cycle. And then she finds out what it's all about. Like, what is this change for? What is happening? And then she meets the prince. That's what it's for. That's what this whole change was for. Like, you're a little girl, you become a woman, and then you realize it's not just pain and it's not just annoyance. There's something beautiful and powerful that can come out of it. And that's why it ends with a wedding. That's why it ends with like finding the prince. The idea of finding the prince isn't like a ridiculous kind of dream of a little girl. It's like, that's how you make people. That's how society continues. So you don't help children.
I have to tell you.
It's so obvious, isn't it?
It is.
It's like, it's so obvious.
It is.
If
and
you don't help
hate
children reach there, then they were going to lose themselves in the forest before they get there.
That is fantastic. Disney has given us this little fantasy that you have to have this big elaborate dress and wedding and everything else, and you're going to be a fairy princess. And I hate that as a dad of three children, 3 daughters, it drives me out of my mind that's because that's coming from this. Yeah. It's coming from the Disney, and they've lost everything else.
Yeah, well, right now, Disney, they've basically decided to throw the fairy tales out. They don't want them because what's in them for them is fire. Like, they can't touch it. They don't understand it. They just see it through their own little political lens. And so, they're making a version of Snow White now. That's one of the reasons why we published this book, was because I found out through the grapevine around 2020, 2021, that Disney was going to put out a version of Snow White live action. And I thought, they can't do it. They can't have there's so many things in the story that they can't do because of their kind of weird ideological position. So I thought, this is the moment where we need to take these stories back. Like, take them back, present them beautifully. We're doing it in an amazing way with an amazing illustrator, world-class illustrator, beautiful
this is a beautiful book.
Like kind of, let's say, heirloom book, like a treasure, not like a throwaway thing, something you put up on the shelf and you have to ask your parents, can we read Snow White again? And so that's what we want. It's like, let's do this. Because a lot of conservatives, they complain, It's like we complain about the state of culture.
But we don't do anything.
Yeah. And that's what we want to do.
So, but I think that's changed.
Yeah.
I
hope so.
Yeah, I think so. What other stories are you telling?
And so what we're doing is we're doing 8 fairy tales, like kind of like 8 of the most known fairy tales. And we're doing them in a series. So we're doing Snow White. The next one is Jack and the Beanstalk. It's called Jack and the Fallen Giants.
Tell me what that really means.
So what I wanted too is I wanted a girl and boy line in the fairy tales, right? So you have a coming of age story of a girl, then you have the coming of age story of a boy. And Jack, that's what Jack is about. And everything is in the story. Once you kind of understand the basic images, you can see what it is. So Jack doesn't have a father. He's with his mother, and they're running out of food. Right? And it's imaged as a cow that's running out of milk. And that's his mother. Like, his mother and the cow are related in the sense that she doesn't have a husband. She's running out of fertility. So is the cow. And so his mom's like, you have to go sell the cow off so that we can have food. But that means death, right? It's like, just like in the story of Elijah and the widow. It's like, well, I'm just going to go and spend my last money, and then we're going to eat the food, and then we're going to die.
Right. And
so Jack discovers seed. So the discovery of seed is both his own transformation into a man, but it's also something more. It's also something like what's a seed? A seed is like the pattern of food, right? It's not food, like just one seed. What is that worth? It's nothing. But if you know what it is, if you understand what it is, you can eat forever, right? And so it's like, it is magic seed, but then seed is magic already because that's what it is. So the rest of the story is about him becoming a man, facing the problems of manhood, right? Goes up the hierarchy, encounters the men that just want to devour him, right? That just want to use their authority and their power to crush him. And he has to find his way through that pattern and find this hierarchy of patterns. That's a way to think about it, right? So he finds first a seed. And it's like, well, what's better than a seed? It's like seed, what does it mean? I don't know what it means. So he goes up into the beanstalk, and the first time he gets his bag of gold. That's something, like in terms of becoming a man, and in terms of understanding what it means to be responsible, what it means to have authority. It's like, if I have gold, I can buy food. That's an interesting idea. I don't need food, but I have gold, I can buy food. But then there's a problem, right? That runs out. So what's better than gold? Well, the thing that makes gold. So the next one he gets is a chicken that lays golden eggs. That sounds stupid in the story, but it's like, well, it doesn't matter. It's basically, first he finds gold, then he finds the thing that makes gold. If I can have that, then I'm good. I can eat forever, right? And so that's the story of Jack. And the final one he gets is, and that's the one that took me forever to understand, which is that he first gets gold, then he gets a chicken that lays golden eggs, and then he gets a harp. Thinking, what's the relationship between all that? I can kind of see the other ones, right? It's like value, And what I finally realized is that when he gets the singing harp, he's basically getting the pattern of everything. Something like the logos, something like the song of the world, or the music of the spheres, they used to say. Basically kind of being able to perceive the pattern of everything as he's in the highest point of heaven or something like that. And so that is what makes everything move, right? The music that Aslan created the world with, something like that. That's what he's getting.
Right.
Yeah.
Talk to me about religious stories or fairy tales, some would say. Jonah and the whale.
Yeah. What's going on?
What is going on with that?
Jonah and the whale is it's one of the most powerful stories in Scripture. I want to be cautious. Like I think that fairy tales, for example, in the secular world are the closest thing to Scripture that we have. But they're nothing compared to Scripture.
Right.
Scripture is astounding. Like the story of Scripture is astounding. So
Scripture is God's knowledge given.
Yeah.
This is man's knowledge.
It's like it's kind of like a pale reflection. It's like a more embodied, for kids, this is easier to kind of absorb. Some of the images in Scripture they're harder to see. But once you see them, it's really astounding. So Jonah, you can think about Jonah as, again, this idea that Jonah is called towards something, right? So think about Snow White, right? Snow White is facing a transition. She's becoming a woman. But how do we do this? So Jonah doesn't want that purpose. He wants his own purpose. Mm-hmm. So what he has to do, sadly, because of that, he has to fall. He has to go down, and he has to come back up. So the story of Jonah, you can think about it as the entire story of humanity. It's like Adam is called towards something, and he's like, no, I want myself. And God's like, okay, well, you're going to make it, but you're going to have to go low. Like you're going to have to go through a lot of pain and suffering until you finally come to what my purpose is for you. And so that's really what the story of Jonah is. It's a repetition of the whole story of the Bible, right? Because it starts with God calling him, a refusal, and it ends in a city that is saved. That's the story of the Bible, right? It starts in the garden, refusal of Adam, and it ends with the heavenly Jerusalem. It's like a little image of what the whole Bible is about. And there are different images that you can see. The story of Jonah is also a bit of a comedy. It's like everything in this story is kind of upside down. It's kind of not making fun, but presenting things in an ironic way so you understand the message. You can also understand it as let's say a return from the fall as well.
Right.
So you go backwards from death, and then you go back up, and then you go into the city, which comes after the fall. And then after that, he goes into the garden with the plants and the serpent. And so it's like this whole structure that follows basically the story of the Bible. It's really astounding.
So what is your background?
Yeah, it's weird. I studied art, and I was always interested in ideas. I became very disillusioned with, let's say, academia quite quickly, and I saw, because a lot of the crazy postmodern stuff that we have now in popular culture, in the world of art, was there, long time ago.
Yeah.
And so all the ideas that are now like bearing fruit.
Where do you
everywhere,
think that started? What art period do you think that started?
That
we're kind of still seeing today?
It really is actually early 20th.
Yeah.
So the everything that we're dealing with now was already there in like the first decades of the 20th century.
Yes.
So Cubism and Dada are the model for all of postmodern art.
Correct.
Like Dada is basically we've kind of accepted Dada and Surrealism as the worldview that we live in now.
Which is insane.
Which is completely crazy.
People will dig up our societies,
and wonder what are we
what the hell
celebrating?
was that a building?
Are we
Nobody will
celebrating
guess that
chaos?
this. Yeah, they won't ever think that was art.
Think about it. The very idea, even normal people, like even us, will catch yourself thinking that something that has value is valuable because it's different. That's a very strange way of thinking, by the way. But we think that artists should be different, that artists are always manifesting like a new way of doing things. But that's not how the ancients understood the arts. That's not how the ancient arts were. The artists were celebratory.
Right.
They were there to celebrate things, and so they were. That's why
they weren't celebrating themselves.
No, they
and
would
their
celebrate
own identity.
their participation in a bigger story, their participation in the state, their participation in their religious tradition. That's what the artists used to do. And now we have this weird idea that artists have to question authority, that artists are questioning the narrative, that they're always deconstructing. And so while I was studying art, I was reading a lot of postmodern philosophy, just reading Derrida, reading Lyotard and Baudrillard, all these French theorists. And there was something about it that was kind of breaking me, that was causing insight in me. And at the same time, my brother, Mathieu, who wrote an amazing book about symbolism, if people want to know, he was also kind of in that same questioning period. So in our 20s, we started discussing and reading and talking, and that's what led me to become Orthodox Christian, which is that I started to see the patterns in the Bible and the pattern in the architecture and in the art and in the music, and thinking, oh, wow, this is it's like a tuning.
It's the whole
fork.
package.
Yeah, it's this whole way of being and of seeing. And I started to explore that, all through my 20s and 30s. But it's weird. It's kind of like what you said before about how if we had had this conversation 20 years ago, people wouldn't have understood. Both my brother and I felt like we had found this key way of seeing the world, but that when we tried to explain it to others, they just didn't understand it, or they didn't even know what the subject was. Like, what are you talking about? And then, so I continued on my world, becoming an artist and also writing about traditional Christian symbolism, writing about iconography, writing about architecture.
And that's the kind of art you do.
That's the kind of art that I do. I don't do a lot now, but because I've been kind of taken on this weird thing.
So, but you were just so people understand, you built altars and
so I make images for churches.
Yes.
That's what I did for many years professionally. Icons, carvings, making croziers for just objects that are used in the church or
Beautiful.
that are images. And that's what I did for many years, and I wrote about it. I started with a friend of mine, something called the Orthodox Art Journal, where I wrote about the symbolism. But I always knew that it wasn't just about religious art, that it was actually about all stories, everything, and all images.
Because that's where this came from, isn't it? It was a way to tell. Thomas Jefferson said something I just absolutely love. If you want people to know what you and your culture was about, embed it in the architecture.
Yeah.
And so that's really what they were doing, was embedding it everywhere, telling the story in as many different ways as you can, right?
Yeah, and the architecture is, I really believe, honestly, that architecture is the most important art.
I agree.
Because it tells you what's inside, what's outside. It gives you a relationship to hierarchy. It gives you a relationship to identity itself, you know, and it's completely unconscious. You don't have to think about it. You just realize. And we know that.
It's that feeling when you walk into a place and you're just like, oh my gosh,
yeah,
I feel so good here. I just want to stay here forever.
Yeah, exactly.
It comes from the way it was all designed.
And the appropriateness, right? And so it's not like there's one type of, let's say, architecture, one type of space, but there are spaces that are designed to do certain things, right? So, you know, like a den where you're smoking cigars is not the same as a grand hall, you know, where you're going to have a ceremony or something. And so all of this way of thinking is really, and so postmodern architecture is an assault. It is an assault on humanity, and it is trying to reprogram us to understand what is inside and what is outside, and what is above and what is below. Even the modern skyscraper. Think about, you know, in the Middle Ages, or later than that, there were literally rules that said you weren't allowed to build anything higher than the church in the town, and that was in order to establish the right hierarchy. It's like, what's the highest thing? Well, God's the highest thing, and then maybe the civil building will be the other one, and we have this kind of this. It's embedded in the land, in our perception, in our engagement with space. But when you go into New York, you're like, well, what's the highest thing? It's the banks. We know that it's the banks. It's not the church anymore. They are the ones that rule, and it creates this whole sense of, it shifts hierarchy. And then postmodern architecture does that towards the idea of difference or deconstruction, or, you know, multiplicity or variability. And so we have these buildings that are completely wacky and that are completely wild, and try to actually subvert your sense of inside and outside and your sense. And it makes people sick. Like, it makes you sick.
Have you ever done any research on Rockefeller Center?
I mean, I know a little bit about it.
I was hammered for saying that is a temple to man.
Yeah.
And it's all embedded. And I mean, I could take you around that and show you everything and say, that's what this means. That's what this means.
They have a statue of Prometheus, like, right there, in outside there.
Right. And I'm always amazed that people will walk by. I think it's, in its own way, a very beautiful building, a beautiful collection of buildings. But you just walk by it, and you have no idea that building is screaming to you. I mean, even Atlas across the street from St. Patrick's, Atlas holding the world, challenging the church. It's amazing.
Yeah. And the thing that people don't realize, and that's the thing about breakdown, is that at first there's something shiny about it, like this idea of celebration of man. It can look really shiny at the beginning. But what's downstream from Rockefeller Center is strip malls. Like, that's what's downstream from and it's like, just, you know, like the suburbs. So this, like,
but no, literally underground is the first mall.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, it was so literally the thing under the grass and the concrete.
Yeah. So you can see that, like you said, if we don't celebrate the right things in the right place, then it leads us to breakdown. So someone who could go to the Rockefeller Center and say, well, why can't we make things like this anymore, you know? And it's actually because they made this that we can't. Because they didn't understand that if you have to celebrate something that transcends you first, and then everything else can come downstream from that.
Well, they did. They did. It was man and machine and the powerful and the money that came from.
I mean, Atlas and Prometheus, these are all images of their titans.
Yeah.
You know?
But you walk into the lobby, and it originally was, you know, kind of a weird ode to science and the machine and Marxism, and it still is kind of now. It's an amazing thing, but they picked their god.
Yeah,
they picked their god.
Yeah,
and it's interesting because Rockefeller said he wanted a purely American architecture. And so he was trying to create American architecture.
Interesting.
Saying that America is about the almighty dollar.
Yeah.
It's about, you know, man can do anything, create anything.
Yeah.
You said earlier that this always happens, and it's alerting you to an end. Okay. So where are we on that path? I have not met more people. I'm telling you, it is crazy. I can go anywhere. And especially before the election, a little less now, people are like, well, maybe God gave us a break. But before the election, everybody I know was saying, I think Christ is coming.
Yeah.
You know, where are we? What are all of these things telling us?
Yeah. We think we always have to be cautious. We don't want to just be screaming fire in a building, but I think that all the signs, and when I say signs, I mean really the things that we've been talking about, they're showing an end. Like they're showing that we're running out. And so
wait, is because we all have this. Yeah. Is that a sign of God to you? Because it's almost, I used to describe it, and I'm not sure this is correct anymore. I used to describe it, when you have something of value, you put an alarm on it. And God gave us rights. And I think that's the alarm. It's almost like a silent alarm going off and everybody going, something's not right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Something's about to be taken.
Yeah, I think that's right. But it happens, and this is something maybe that can be useful for people to see, is that we talked a lot about the deconstruction and the decomposition and the breakdown. And that is definitely one of the clearest signs of the end. But there's another sign, which is the opposite. It's something like the compensation for that breakdown. And so what happens is that as things are breaking down, there's also systems of power that are becoming more and more powerful simultaneously. And it looks like a contradiction at the outset, but obviously everybody can see it happen now. It's like globalism and its kind of idea of a world government, or however they want to phrase it, is hand in hand with
the destruction,
with like the kind of variety and this worship of difference and this worship of. And so both of those are happening simultaneously. So we have to be able to watch. So even like in terms of America, I hate Americans. Some might not be happy with what I'm about to say, which is
all right. You're Canadian.
Yeah, if you're not careful and you focus too much on individual rights,
yes,
right, then you are simultaneously calling upon higher and higher forms of authority, because you need an arbiter for those rights. There's no way around it. Usually the way that it would function in kind of any society or traditional society is that all those relationships would be moderated on the local sphere, right? So, it's like, who's a guarantor of your rights and responsibilities? Well, it's your family, it's your village, it's your town, it's your parish, it's like your church or whatever. But now because we're like, I'll do whatever I want to do. And as much on the left as on the right, it's like, I'll do whatever I want and nobody can tell me what to do. Either that person has like crazy rainbow hair or has a Gadsden flag and is saying it's me. That is calling constantly the arbiters of power to become more powerful, because you always need someone to arbitrate that power. And so it's happening in America, but it's also happening even at a global scale. We can see it.
That's why I think people, because I wonder if people really want responsibility. A lot of people just don't want. They just want to check in, check out, have a cute little life and move on. But, real true freedom requires an awful lot of work as an individual. Yeah. And we kind of gave that away. In America, we just kind of went, they're going to take care of it for us.
Yeah, we want the rights, but not the responsibilities.
Not the responsibilities at all. Yeah. And because we gave it all to Washington, which was a long way away, we can just bitch about how things were being done in Washington because they're falling apart here, and not taking the responsibility that, dummy, it's falling apart here, not just because you didn't pay attention to what's happening there, but because you're not doing anything here.
Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right. I think that one of the things that was fascinating about America in some ways is that the rights part was made explicit in order to protect people, but the responsibility part was almost like implicit. Like everybody knew when it started that, of course you're responsible. Of course. But now we just have the rights, and we've lost this sense of local responsibility and local participation and all of these things. And so it's as if you can see, right, in the story of the U.S., you can kind of see this move towards centralization, even though the beginning of the country was actually a way to try to prevent too much centralization. But now everybody just looks to the president. I mean, as much on the right and on the left, it was like, well, the president's going to save us. It's like, how is that possible? Why is that real?
That's one of my biggest beefs. And I've been saying, you got a reprieve. God was like, you know what? I'm not into the smoting thing right now. Let him go. And so we have this reprieve, but God only does the things that we cannot do.
Yeah.
Okay. And then he leaves all the stuff up that we can do up to us. And it's kind of like, okay, guys, I mean, I just answered your prayer. He's not the savior.
Yeah.
It's going to require you to change your life as well. And I hope we've learned that lesson.
Yeah, I hope so. And that's what, in some ways, at least, I mean, I think everybody is trying to do their part. That's why, because one of the things we saw, I think, in the past few generations is how those that are really ideologically possessed, they want to get involved in education. Like they're actually trying. They go into the school boards, they take over, the schools, they become principals, they become teachers. And we're like, we just want to make money. And we don't want to get involved in this. But it's like your kids are getting taken. And so one of the things we've been trying to, that's one of the reasons why, because it sounds weird when people talk to me, they're like, why, like you're explaining symbolism, but you're writing these fairy tales. It's like, that's one of the things we want to do is to say, no, we need to be now mindful and say, what stories are we telling our children? Can we get involved? Like, how can we get involved in, because a lot of people are doing homeschooling, that's a way to do it. There are different ways to do it, but we need to be mindful and like look towards what it is that is forming our kids. And that's a better guarantee of the future, than making $1 million.
So do you find any of the call back to traditionalism, do you find any of it to be a little scary? Like there's people who I know who are great and they want the Latin Mass. Okay. I'm not a Catholic, so I don't understand, but that is full of symbolism and ritual and everything else and sounds pretty great. But there's also people who are also kind of going a little further, to another kind of dark side of, now let's use this power and we'll have a vicar of Christ in power, which is also terrifying.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that, this is, obviously I'm an Orthodox Christian, so I definitely do love tradition, but we have to be obviously careful that we don't weaponize tradition towards something else. The purpose of tradition is to orient us towards the highest good, which is God. But if we think of it as a weapon in order to kind of control people and get what we want, then it's doing the opposite of what it should be doing. And that's the temptation. It's part of this dual problem that I mentioned at the outset, which is that as we watch things kind of deconstruct and fall apart, like some people would I'm going to look towards unity. I'm going to look towards something that binds us together. And that's absolutely normal and necessary. But we have to be careful not to do it in a way, that is in some ways becomes tyrannical, because that's not what we want. The idea of tradition isn't tyranny. It's this balance between unity and multiplicity, right? It's this balance between kind of things that are set in our ways, but also kind of mercy and forgiveness and compassion towards those that can't necessarily totally align themselves. And it's hard because when things get crazier and crazier and more decomposed, we want to like turn around and grab onto the most solid thing that we can find. And I think that's completely normal, but we also, like you said, have to be cautious, because I think that that's actually what happened in the 20th century. I think that the shift from Weimar to the Reich is exactly that. Yeah. It's like things were falling apart, crazy, chaotic.
And evil, and the people that were rising up were evil, but they grabbed the churches who were all too willing to participate, and then it became also about a God thing.
Yeah.
And it was like, well, what are you doing?
So that's definitely the issue now. We have to, I think as religious people, as Christians, we have to be attentive, to kind of always remember the vision that Christ gave. In some ways, Christ gave the best vision for that, because what Christ offers is a kind of authority and a kind of power, but that is loving, right? It's forgiveness.
Yes.
It's giving itself to those that it has authority above. And so we have to be careful not to think really like in the 20th century to think, oh, things are falling apart. Now it's total chaos. We need to grab this. We need to just like impose order, get everybody in step so that, we avoid that. But that leads to its own, I mean, we saw it in the 20th century. It leads to its own madness.
Talk to me a bit about, and I don't know if you even can, but I think this use of symbolism by the Jewish people on Sabbath and Passover is the most divine I've ever seen. I mean, I don't think they would have lasted if they didn't have those rituals, being scattered all over the earth. If they hadn't have said, what's this spice mean? What does this mean? What does this mean? What do the candles represent? Yeah. And had that tradition, they might have forgotten who they were.
Yeah, I totally agree. I I think that, we can look at that also for Christians. That is, we have the same thing. We have it all. It's all there too. Like we have Easter and we have Pascha. We have Pascha and we have all these celebrations. Pascha is Easter, basically, like the resurrection.
Okay, yeah.
And we have these feasts that we've celebrated over millennia, and they also do that. They're similar in the way that the Jewish people have their kind of weekly rituals and also their yearly rituals, where they celebrate certain things that bind them together in the presence of God over the year. And so Christians have all that too, but because of this weird materialism that has set itself up in Christianity, we've tried to get rid of that, thinking it's superstition or something like that, saying like, oh, this is maybe superstition or idolatry or whatever.
You hear all the time, Christmas isn't Christmas. That was the day the sun god worshipers were worshiping, and they just took that. It's not the
it's nonsense,
date.
By the way.
I know, but it's not the date that they chose, and they might have done that to bring more people into the fold, but they're not teaching paganism. It was let's make this ritual important to teach this principle, right?
Yeah, and it's also because they're not used to thinking in the language of symbolism, they don't realize, for example, people will say, well, look at these images that we use during Christmas. Some of them look like images that would exist in a pagan world. And, by the way, that's also true of the tabernacle and the temple, right? The way that the tabernacle is described in Scripture, there are analogies between that tabernacle and some, some temple in Egypt, or in Babylon. Right. But it's just that it was reoriented towards the true God and towards the true purpose. And so the idea that sometimes you might find certain things that people are doing in, let's say, in Christmas, for example.
This is the best explanation I've ever heard.
Yeah, you say, the pagans had trees that they decorated, and so we can't do that because, that's stupid. But it's like, well, look at the tree we're doing. Look at what we're doing. We're putting a star at the top or an angel because in this Christmas story, that's what showed people the way to Christ. And then we decorate it with all these beautiful all these beautiful kind of bright things, and then we put the hidden gifts at the bottom, like Christ was hidden in the cave or hidden in the manger. It's like the whole structure of the tree is a Christian structure. Now, whether or not pagans did something similar, that doesn't matter. Yeah,
it's like Satan takes something good and perverts it.
That's right.
God can take the things that have been bad and change it for good.
Yeah, and that's it. By the way, in Scripture, it happens all the time, right? All of the building arts come from Cain's descendants, right? They come as a consequence of the fall and are used to build weapons and to build civilization in a negative way. But then God is constantly taking that and saying, no, let's turn it. Let's turn it towards the right purpose. And the image of the heavenly Jerusalem at the end of Scripture is exactly that. It's like all of this civilization stuff that you guys have that was developed because of the fall, I'm going to help reorder it towards its true purpose.
Let me go back to demons here for a second. Tucker Carlson said recently that he had encountered a demon. He had scratches on his body. What do you make of that? I mean, I know Tucker. I believe Tucker. He's not a...
No, I don't think... I think definitely that his experience is absolutely real. I don't think he's making it up at all. I think that this is going to sound weird for people when I say this. It's like, he's sleeping in bed with his dogs, right? And so first thing you think is, it's the dogs, right? The dogs did it. And the answer to me is something like, well, maybe it's the dogs, but maybe just like in the story of the lizard people and the story of the 5G causing COVID, maybe it's not just the dogs, in the sense that maybe the causality of it, even though maybe the mechanical causes are the dog scratching him, the coalescence of all the things that he experienced, which is he experienced this like terror, and he experienced this being frozen in the pressure on his chest, and then waking up and having these scratches. All those phenomena together, even though they might have their own mechanical causes, maybe he ate something wrong or maybe whatever, like God doesn't work outside of mechanical causes, right. But it's how these come together.
You can't change the math.
Exactly. It's how these come together into these meaningful, powerful experiences that what's important. And so if you ask me, did Tucker encounter a demon? My answer is, I think so. I think he really did. Does it mean that there are no mechanical causes to what happened to him? And that, no, not. Why would that matter?
Isn't a miracle in some ways a change in perspective?
Yeah. And I think that that's what he experienced. He experienced something that brought him to be able to see more of reality and to understand his place in the world in a way that he had never seen before. And that, like you said, is a small miracle. And I think that a lot of people are seeing that happen to them in different ways right now, where, through weird circumstances, through all kinds of things that happen in your life, through these coincidences, you could say, that happen, it forces us to see that there's some higher meaning that's kind of drawing us towards itself.
And do you think you need to have the belly of the whale to get the land and standing upright again?
I think for most of us, probably. There are stories of people that are kind of faithful from birth. You see it in Scripture, and like Samuel, for example. And there's certain characters like that are. But I think for most of us, we kind of need to kind of smack down, because, and it's not a kind of masochism or it's anything like that. Is that in order to be able to give yourself to a higher participation in meaning, you have to experience the incapacity to do it on your own. And that's true at the micro level. Like, the only way you can be good in a basketball team is if you understand that you can't do it on your own. Mm-hmm. And if you try to do it on your own, you're going to be the worst basketball player in the world. You have to kind of give that up. And then when you do, then your little part now coalesces with others and then yields this beautiful thing. But that's true for all of life, which is that unless you realize that you don't have the power to do it on your own, to participate in the highest goods, then you're going to have to suffer. Like, suffering will be part of your experience. And that suffering will kind of force you to give up in some ways and to say, no, whatever strength I has to be in service of something higher, or else it's pointless.
20 years ago, I was on tour. Every day I was meeting about probably 1,000 to 2,000 people. I was doing a stage show, television show, radio show, meet and greets for a book, and it was intense every day. And it was right before Christmas. And at that time, I had my first real death threat. We had to have 2 buses, and I'd have to switch buses, and you never knew which one I was on. And somebody tried to run one of the buses off the road and actually did. Luckily, it wasn't the one I was on. And there was this really demonic video on the internet at the time when it was still pretty young. And they had taken a clip of me and slowed down and then put this driving hard rock music behind it. And it said traitor, where my name would have been if I was on television, okay? And this computer voice just said over and over again, all traitors must die.
Oh my goodness.
All traitors must die. Terrifying.
Yeah.
So I'm going to these meet and greets every single day with 1,000 people coming up. And I had probably 6 to 8 people on me as body people.
Yeah.
And I'm in this store, this bookstore, and I see this guy. He's wearing a long trench coat. It was cold, but he just caught my eye. Didn't look right. He had his hands in his pockets, and I realized my guys had noticed him too because they started kind of closing in on me as he was closing.
Oh my!
By the time he got up to me, they were all right there.
Yeah.
And he had his hands in his pockets, and I remember thinking, I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm just going to wish him Merry Christmas. And I said, Merry Christmas. I put my hand out, and he started taking his hand out, and he said, all traders and he was on the ground.
That's wild.
That freaked me out, obviously. And I had this wrestle with what I do, what I say, who am I really, why am I doing this? And then this connection with God. I was, this sounds so weird, but I was given in a blessing the gift of discernment. And I still have it today. I don't have it in like this setting per se, but when I'm in a crowd and I can look you in the eye for a second, I'll hear sad, tired, happy, filled with the Spirit. I actually hear those things, and I can know what's going on.
And it's from that moment
it's from a blessing right after that moment.
Okay.
And so I go home. I'm high as a kite. I've just been through this, but I feel like spiritually empowered. I get home, and there's this big box in my foyer. I had a year before, and only one person knew this, not even my wife, nobody knew this. I was in a temple, and I was looking at this painting of Christ holding the black sheep, and the black sheep, his head was in the crook of Christ's arm, but he was looking back from where Christ is walking away from. So and I sat there and I looked at it for the longest time, and I thought, why is he looking back? Is he worried about the other sheep that might still be lost? Is he, what is happening in that symbolism, if there was any? And I wanted to get that painting, and so I looked, online. I couldn't find the painting anywhere. Year later, I'm coming home from that tour, and this giant box is sitting in my foyer. And it's right before Christmas, and I just walked by it because I thought, well, something my wife got for me or something else. And she just kept walking by it because she thought it was something that I had gotten her. And I finally said, are we going to move the box under the tree? And she said, I thought that was something you got. And I said, no. We open it up. There's no note. There's nothing. It's that painting framed.
Wow.
We call the people who shipped it, and the guy said, look, I know this is going to sound weird. I don't know you at all. He said, but for some reason, he said, I saw you in a store a year ago, and you asked for that painting, and they said they didn't have it. And he said, I just heard, help him find that painting. And he's like, I'm like, I don't even know him. I'm just dismissing that. And he went... after a year, dismissing it over and over and over again, over a year's period, he said, that painting showed up on my dock. And I went around to everybody and said, where's this painting? Who put this here? And he said, I don't know how it got here. He said, but I interpreted it as, Lord, if you want him to have the painting, okay, I can at least frame it and ship it. He's like, so I'm sorry if that sounds really weird. He didn't know the rest of the story. So now I'm like, the Lord has you. He has you. He knows you personally, and he's got you.
Yeah.
I go in for surgery 4 days later. I have surgery. I'm in so much pain, and I'm very high tolerant to drugs. And they can't keep me out of pain. And so they're just loading me with fentanyl and everything else. And I'm in this weakened state. And it's bone crushing in this hospital room. I go from the highest ever to the most desperate ever, because I'm hearing voices. You think you know how you think you know how I'm going to destroy you? Mm-hmm. You have no chance. I'm going to destroy you and your family. Mm-hmm. And it was real to me. And if the windows hadn't been if it wasn't a New York hospital that had locks on the windows, I think I would have honestly thrown myself out of the window. Mm-hmm. My wife calls, says, I'm on my way. Do you need anything? I said, no, honey, there's no reason to come. I'm okay. And she said, I just immediately overwhelmed with, he's in trouble. Mm-hmm. She said, I came. Now, I had fallen back to sleep in between, and I wake up, and my wife is singing hymns, and the spirit is, that darkness, completely gone. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, but if you don't believe that kind of stuff, I don't think that happens to everybody, but it does happen.
Yeah. I think everybody has at least little versions of things like that in their life.
But they'll dismiss it as a coincidence.
That's right, yeah.
Or maybe that was crazy. I was just thinking that.
Yeah, well, in your case, things align so much that it's hard to say. It's a coincidence. But there are smaller versions of that everybody deals with all the time. These little moments kind of coalescing and becoming bright, and kind of standing out from everyday life, this kind of boring everyday life. And that's exactly what it is. In some ways, they are little glimmers that we are in something bigger, like we participate in something bigger than ourselves. And we've been trained to ignore them or to say, like you said, it's just coincidence, it's superstition, but these are part of the world. Like they are what brings reality together. This type of thing, like this idea that events come together and kind of manifest meaning, it happens to you every day, all the time, in the little ways. Every time you are able to finish a project or you're able to work with someone in the team or whatever, you have these little experiences. And sometimes, like the story you told me, then it shows itself in a way that is really drawing you into something bigger than you. And but that's actually how the world works.
It is.
Yeah.
You were brought to, I'm a recovering alcoholic, so I had this massive crash in my life and didn't know what I believed in and blah, blah, blah. And one of the first things I adopted was don't accept anything as a coincidence. Anything. For 30 days, dismiss, wow, that was weird.
Yeah.
Pursue it. And sometimes you'll pursue it and you go down a dead end and there's nothing, that you can find there that other than it was just kind of a weird coincidence. But there are other times that you're like, holy cow, look at how God is working, how the universe works.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah. And the nihilists are absolutely wrong. Like you cannot avoid meaning. Meaning is, the world is structured in meaning. For every movement you make, everything you do, every time you move towards the door or anything that you do is always an alignment towards purpose. You can't avoid it. Everything you do.
There's body language even. Right.
And it's the opposite of what the nihilists say. It's actually, you can't avoid meaning. You can't. It's the way that you're
Then how come so many of us are looking for meaning in our life?
That's because how can I say this? It's like they have this lofty idea, right? Christ says you have to be faithful in small things before you have access to the bigger things. If you can't see the bigger meaning, like if you can't find like a purpose for your life, realize that there are purposes in front of you that are very close to you that you can engage with right away, whether it's your friendships, whether it's your family, whether it's, your community, whatever it is. There are these little things that you can embark on that will give you little meanings in life. And that those, if you're faithful in those, and all of a sudden, like you said, like the story that you told, all of a sudden miracles start to appear and you realize that the world is actually full of light and is full of miracles.
Did you see that the tabernacle was found in one of the churches that burned down in California?
No.
Yeah, there's a couple of stories. The firefighters are saying now that there was a tabernacle in a church. Everything was completely destroyed. It was like, the chimney and the tabernacle.
Wow.
I mean, that's an awfully hot fire for that to go unscathed. And there's always stories like that about, religious icons or whatever.
Yeah, that survive fires and that are like just almost like magically present after the disaster. Yeah. These are real things. And you could say, it's funny, you could say it's a coincidence. Mm-hmm. But it's like, it's like in the case of a tabernacle or the case of the image of Christ or an icon. It's like, that's the image of the thing that's the most important for you. And through the chaos, it's preserved. And it's like, that's what you hope for. That's what you wish for. That's what you want to happen when your family go through a crisis, is that the little kernel, that seed, is preserved through the flood. And so when you see it happen, why are you saying it's a coincidence? It's like, that's everything that we're made to participate in. And that's everything we look for. Like if you make it out of a crisis, it's because you are able to find that kernel, that little seed that is kind of going to pull you through, that little arc that is going to bring you through the chaos. So when it happens at a greater scale, why are you surprised? It's like, that's how the world works. That's how your life works. That's how all of our lives work,
It's, somebody said recently to me, faith is a choice. Hope is a byproduct.
Yeah, you're right. And if you align yourself, faith is you can understand faith exactly as this. How can I say this? It's like when you're in a situation of chaos, like in a difficulty, you lose sight of that which is pulling you forward. But you can know that it's there, right? You can know that it's there because you're still breathing, you're still moving, you're still eating, you're still doing these little things that are aligned towards purpose. St. Paul talks about how faith is the proof of things unseen, and that's it, right? It's like if you move towards something, even if you don't have it yet, then, like you said, then hope will be inevitable, right? Can I say this? Like, believe that your family can become a little image of the kingdom of God. And that it really can, even though it's not right now. It really can. And if you do that, then everything will align towards that. Like, if you really believe it and you move towards it, things will align towards it, of course.
Act as though it is, and it manifests.
It will come together, Yeah. And people weaponize that in all kinds of kind of annoying ways where they're like, if you want to make money, you kind of visualize it. And
right.
It's like, that probably does work, but there are better applications of this than just, making a bunch of money. There are those that actually like hold the world together and like align it towards the highest good.
Final segment with Jonathan here in just a second. First, let me talk to you about PreBorn. The sanctity of life, that is this month. We honor the 66 million babies whose lives have been tragically ended through abortion since Roe versus Wade. Sadly, since Roe was overturned, babies' lives are even at greater risk because the abortion pill accounts for over 60% of all abortions now. This tragedy is even a bigger tragedy because it's available on demand 24/7. But in the midst of this darkness, there is a light that shines, and it's PreBorn. They've rescued over 300,000 babies from abortion, and every day, on average, they rescue another 200. When a woman is considering abortion, she hears her baby's heartbeat and sees the face on ultrasound. The baby's chance at life is doubled. PreBorn shares free heartbeats and God's love for mom and child. They both need our help. For just $28, the cost of a dinner, you can sponsor an ultrasound and introduce a mom to her baby for the first time. 100% of your donation will go towards saving babies. Will you help? Dial pound 250, say the keyword baby. That's pound 250, keyword baby, or go to preborn.com/Glenn. That's preborn.com/Glenn. Can I ask you, we talked on radio today a little bit about these aliens. Mm-hmm. First of all, just what do aliens represent in the world of icons?
Well, it's all there in the language, if you think about it. So we say unidentified flying objects. It's so funny because when someone asks you, do you believe in unidentified flying objects? You're like, well, how can I not believe in unidentified? They're unidentified flying objects. Right. So of course I believe.
You're not asking me if I believe in.
It's like, right. What are you asking? It's like, do you believe in aliens? Well, of course I believe in aliens. Aliens means things that I don't know what they are, or people that I don't know what they are, or creatures that I don't know what they are. So they're obviously
different.
Aliens exist. And, you know, UFOs exist. Now, what does it mean in terms of the story? And the key is in that question, or the key is, what is something that's alien? What is something that presents itself to you as a puzzle, something that you don't know what it is, right? A stranger, right? It's like a stranger isn't like a specific type of person. It's just the type of person that you don't know. Right. And so the fact, this has to do with this question, the fact that we're obsessed with the strange, we're obsessed with difference, is the mythological expression of that is something like obsessed with UFOs and obsessed with aliens, right? Because we see value in the alien, that which is...
Right, so this is the tyranny of exception.
Something
right?
like that,
yeah.
Okay. And so people project, and so people, well, there are two sides of it. Like if you look at the mythology of aliens, you kind of have two aspects of it. On the one hand, you have the alien in the sense of the different monster that comes and eats me, right? So if you think of like War of the Worlds, you know, or Independence Day, that's how it's presented. And so we're America. There are these like things that we don't know what they are. They're attacking us. They're invading us. They're trying to destroy us, and we have to stop them, right? So that's one image of the strange. There's another one which is a fetishization of the strange, which is they're angels. They're going to save us. These aliens, they're superior, they're more advanced. Like we have all this type of imagery that projects them into this higher role where they are now going to kind of save us. So we have to be attentive to that, right? We really have to be attentive to when people kind of fall into these narrative images about what it is that these strange and unidentified things are, because it tells us, first of all, it shows us that we're dealing with a world that's on the limit, right? So the strange manifests itself on the border. Right. So you have an identity, you have a border, and that which is on the other side, that's what's strange. It's the dragon that's out there. But there's also the dragon in the elite circle in the government. You're like, I don't trust that either protect me. That is one of the problems of our moment now, which is normally your leader, your father, is the origin of you, right? The peoples that are above you, they are related to you, like not necessarily biologically, but they're related to you in the sense that they identify with you as a body and you are serving them, they're serving you. And so that's like a normal thing. But one of the problems we have now is that we have this weird situation where people think that the elites want something else, like they are a strange influence on us. And so you could say it's the infiltration of the strange into the hierarchy. It's a kind of corruption from inside. And the corruption from inside, everybody understands it. There's a mythological image, which is the lizard people, but there's also, the police chief that is serving another interest besides the one he's supposed to serve. His interest is he wants to fill his pockets. So because of that, he's corrupting the world, because he's using his position of authority in order to gather things to himself rather than do the job he's supposed to do. And so we can understand this idea of the influence of the strange in our world. Now, that's the negative aspect of it. The reason why we also have this image of like the kind of glowing alien or the one that's going to save us is that sometimes the strange is also a land of opportunity, right? So like that's where trade comes from. So the stranger brings new things, like things that we and so we want to engage with that which is strange, because there are hidden treasures, there are like hidden opportunities. It grows your world. It makes your world bigger. If you kind of engage with the people around you, with the people you don't know or things you don't know, there are like little treasures hidden in that. And that's so the mythological image is these two extremes, right? This idea of like the alien that will save us, right? Or the alien that will devour us. But the reality is in our everyday life is there's a kind of balance between the two, right? So think about like, if you think about the idea even just of space exploration, this idea of going out it's a mariner's tale, like this idea of going out on a boat and like discovering new lands, and then there are like all these new treasures. But then there are also, like we saw in the Columbian Exchange, there's also like disease and all these things that happen at the conjunction of that which is known and that which is strange. So that's a way, in terms of storytelling, that's a way of understanding it. We can see how it affects our thinking. that to me is more important than understanding what these things are. So let me just break it down so that people understand that. So let's say we have these unidentified flying things, right? And so we can say clearly that they are an alien influence on us. There's some kind of foreign influence on our society, but we don't know what it is because that's why it's unidentified. So is it extraterrestrials from like other planets that are trying to kind of pierce into our world and communicate with us? We don't know. Is it aliens from another dimension or whatever that are trying? We don't know. Is it foreign governments that are trying to spy on us? Or is it our government that are doing things that we don't know what it is and that are hiding from us? All of those, in terms of story, are the same. They are foreign alien influences that are trying to affect us, and we don't know what they are. So whichever it is, and I'm not saying it's one or the other, but whichever it is, we can see it in the same way. So instead of debating, just like, obviously we have to find out what these are.
Yeah.
Because it's dangerous to have alien influences that you can't recognize and you can't identify. It's very dangerous to have that. It's like a spy or like well,
it's also part of this is, I've had the thought, is this the government staging this to distract us or to do some sort of mind game on us? Because it does play mind games on people.
And that would be the lizard person situation.
Right.
Where the government has intentions that are opaque to us.
Yes.
Even though they're supposed to be our leaders.
Right.
But they're supposed to help us.
Right.
But they have other intentions. We don't know what they are. They're opaque. And so they're lying to us and pretending about these things.
What happens to a society where you don't get the answer?
I think that either it leads to further breakdown, or it's a hidden aspect to create more tyranny. It has to be one or the other, right? So it's like if the government, let's say, is trying to establish more control over us, and they use this smoke screen, the smoke show of like aliens that are coming to distract us while they're doing something else, like a magic show, right? It's like it leads towards tyranny. If it's like foreign governments that are trying to like get information from us or do that, then it leads to similar consequences, which is basically being taken over by a foreign power. And so all of these, that's why, when you have...
But wouldn't it be better for society if the government came out and said, whatever answer it is, and just said, look, here's all of the documents.
Yeah.
We really don't know what it is, but we think it's this.
Yeah.
Isn't that better long-term for a people than saying, what are you talking about? That's a conspiracy theory.
For sure, there's a game being played. There's definitely a game being played. I think that the U.S. government, but not just the U.S. government, the modern government uses secrecy, That we are used to thinking that it's normal that the government keeps secrets from its people, and it's not. It's absolutely not normal. It's very odd that we have these secret agencies that function without. We don't even know what their structure of accountability is.
I've talked to congressmen who oversee those people,
and they don't even know.
And they say, "I'm not telling you. I oversee you.
Yeah.
I'm oversight."
Yeah.
Nope.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not normal.
That's a very, very dangerous situation for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it has to do with this problem, because think about the secret. Like a secret is a good way to understand what it is we're talking about. So a secret is something that's hidden, that's unknown, right? That's similar to the alien. There's something happening and it's hidden. I don't know what it is. I can see some things poking out. Like I can see things kind of poking out and I can see that there's some phenomena, but there's a secret, right? And that exactly, how can I say this? That is the realm of all of this story, the realm of the alien, the realm of all of this stuff.
But it's also the realm of iconography, is it not? There is something there, but it's kind of hidden. You have to study it, and you can find the answer, and it has the story.
Yeah. Well, so there's a type of secret that is bound in religious stories, which is something like the secret of the sacred, the secret of the divine, right? So God reveals himself in small ways. And behind those revelations is something much larger and bigger and more and loftier. right? So in that sense, that's the good secret. There is obviously something that's a good secret, which is, there is something a good example would be like, there is the secret intimacy that you share with your wife. Mm-hmm. That's a good secret, right? That is very different from, it's very different from the alien conspiracy type secret.
Yeah, a destructive secret.
But secrets aren't bad in themselves. Like intimacy is a form of secret. Yeah. But like it's different from intimacy and alien is the opposite from each other.
Right.
Intimacy is a secret that we share together and that we know, and it's to our goodness. And the alien secret is a secret that I'm keeping from others with other intentions that are using you to get something that I don't know what it is from you. It's very different.
It's great to talk to you. I hope you come back.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. This is a great conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.